Hello there, I'm famous and very wealthy YouTuber Salari, creator of videos that probably make you pretty sad. Before we get started, I just wanted to have a quick word with the people that clicked on this video knowing that they're going to hate it. You know who you are, I know who you are, and there's a good chance that everyone else does too. Firstly, even though your gut instinct might be telling you to click dislike and maybe even leave a mean comment, I ask you kindly to resist doing so for now. I know how you feel. Every time I see a James Corden video recommended to me, I want to call up my ISP and tell them to cancel my internet so there's no chance of it happening again, but I know in the long run I would just be harming myself. Although many of my viewers agree with what I say and like to hear my analysis, I would like to reach through to you too, and I think you need to hear what I have to say. I am a straight, half-white man, so I'm familiar with some of your experiences, and I want to make it clear that I am not attacking you directly. I want to help you, and others like you, help you understand why you may think the way you do. I want to be sympathetic, but part of that means being critical. So if you give me your time and watch this through knowing that, it would greatly be appreciated. And I guess that if by the end of the video you still feel the same way, go ahead, tell me I'm wrong, insult me, my physical appearance, whatever you'd like. I'm comfortable with who I am, just don't go after anyone in the comments, please. Anyway, let's go. What makes a man a man? Wealth, success, status, strength, the ability to provide, a beard. Is it all these things? Well, if you ask a lot of men, they would say yes. These and possibly some other traits as well. All these and more are aspects of masculinity that are considered necessary to be a well-rounded, red-blooded male. The traits of manliness are set in stone, and part of growing up as a man is having them ingrained into you by male relations, friends, media, and society at large. It's about standing out as an individual to be celebrated, but at the same time, conforming to society's expectations and perception of what qualifies as a man. In present times, societies have begun to move away from the idea of traditional masculinity. We've become more accepting that men don't necessarily need defining, that they're broad and complex creatures with feelings that require acknowledging, desires that need fulfilling, and may not feel comfortable adhering to many masculine norms. This is a welcome and very necessary change that's helped a lot of men feel comfortable in their own skin, and less anxious about needing to change to fit into what societies expect of them. Men are no longer expected to remain stoic. They can express themselves via their appearance, admit to vulnerability, and accept that in relationships there are no set roles. They're not required to be a breadwinner, and they don't have to define success by the kind of car they drive or how many figures they have in their bank account. However, as things have progressed, there has been opposition. Forces from different parts of the world in every sphere, whether it's online, the political realm, media, and even society at large. There are plenty of men and even women who are insistent on sticking with tradition, that men should be men. This has put many men in a position where they feel the need to put aside their need to express themselves in order to placate others who want them to fit into the mold given to them. Many people have also perceived shifting gender norms as the erasure of men, claiming that as we've become more critical of masculinity and patriarchal tradition, we've become more critical of the people who abide by them as well. Of course, this reassessment on what defines a man isn't an attack on men, it's reconsidering how, despite the fact that for a long time we've seen these gender norms as a way of creating people that are good for society, there are aspects which are harming those around them and even themselves, such as romanticizing pain, sadness, and even death. Which isn't all too surprising given that part of the ideology of the right is preserving traditions. As young boys start to become young men, they enter a confusing world with feelings that they don't quite understand. It's at this point where they become particularly vulnerable to right-wing figures and groups who want to uphold the masculine ideal. They explain the world to them in simplistic terms, assuring them that so long as men are in charge, everything will be fine, and if you face any criticisms from people about your actions, the things you say, or if you're rejected romantically, especially by women, they comfort you by saying that it's not you who needs to change, the world does. As insecurities are exploited by these forces, men become more prone to anger. They think that being a man means taking control, and if you can't control the world around you, then can you call yourself a man? They're convinced that there are conspiracies created by women and other marginalized groups to dethrone and emasculate them, to take the world from their hands and rob them of the power they've been told that they're entitled to. As they desperately hold on to the facade of masculinity, believing that it'll work out for them, just as it did for the generations before them, rage builds and develops insular people who retreat from the world and believe that they have no place in it. Or in some tragic cases, they start lashing out against those that they believe to be their enemy, whether it's strangers, classmates, loved ones, or even ethnic and religious groups. The question I want to explore here is, how do so many men fall down these right-wing rabbit holes that promote the preservation of traditional masculinity? How are they doing serious psychological harm to themselves, and in what ways do they justify that? Why has the idea of manliness been so alluring to men over the past 70 years, and what would be so bad about leaving it in the past? How men go from complaining about being unlucky in love to racist conspiracy theorists. Let's have a look at how the right is creating and benefiting from a new generation of sad, angry, and terrified men. In order to understand what we think of as masculinity or manliness, we don't have to look back too far. I don't want to give an entire history lesson on how masculinity has changed over the centuries, otherwise we'll be here all day, but it's important to recognize how and why a typical man came into prominence in order to understand why people insist on preserving it. I'll try and keep this brief, so bear with me. In the late 1940s and early 1950s, just after World War II, the world began to recover from one of the most devastating conflicts that it's ever seen. During this time, Western countries, especially the US, experienced a prolonged period of economic prosperity, and people felt confident enough in their financial situation to create families, specifically nuclear families, with a husband, wife, and 2 or more children, a structure which was heavily promoted by governments and corporations. The gender roles within these families established the rigid traditional gender roles that are still encouraged to this day. The husband, who would be the breadwinner, who was doted upon by their family as a thank you for keeping a roof over their heads and food in their bellies. The wife would take care of the husband and children's needs by being a homemaker and emotional outlet, and the children would do what children do while being obedient to their parents. If you've peered into the world of modern right-wing movements, this notion of a family unit is still being held up by them as a standard. They believe that this is part of the reason things were better back then. Things were less complicated, and the nuclear family was able to cater to each other's needs. This wasn't the case though, as in order to be a patriarch of a family, men were expected to ignore their emotional needs, which is an awful expectation, especially for the ones that had just returned from a horrifying war and probably were suffering from severe PTSD after witnessing unimaginable atrocities. They just have to get on with their lives and pretend that it never affected them. Spousal and child abuse were also rampant during this era, but violence against family members was normalized to such an extent that older generations still believe to this day that physical harm to your loved ones, especially children, is necessary to create well-rounded adults that see pain as a consequence for stepping out of line. That whole thing where people say, "My dad beat me with a belt when I did something wrong and I turned out right," is called survivor bias. When you believe that child abuse is okay, you did not turn out fine. As the years progressed, the notion of what a man should be largely stayed the same, but there were some deviations that arose in the 60s, like with the hippie movement. Men and everyone else began to question war, violence, and tradition. They believed in being emotionally expressive, embracing love, and shunning the suffocating traditions of society. The 70s had pioneering artists in the glam rock movement, such as David Bowie, Freddie Mercury, and the New York Dolls. Wearing makeup, women's clothing, being open about their sexual fluidity, all the while making some of the most groundbreaking music ever heard. As we entered the 80s though, manliness made a return. Strength in men was being celebrated once again in far more hyper-masculine fashions. The political landscape shifted, and countries like America began to make it clear that they had a powerful presence in the world, both in their militaries and economies. We saw the rise of the action stars such as Arnold Schwarzenegger in Commando, Bruce Willis in Die Hard, and Sylvester Stallone in Rambo, which, to be clear, was actually an anti-war movie. John Rambo suffered from severe PTSD, and he was inspired by Audie Murphy, America's most decorated soldier of World War II, who would sleep with a pistol under his pillow and often wake up at night screaming and shooting. Rambo is not a celebration of war or manliness. I just wanted to get it off my chest. In the 1980s, men weren't just men, they had to be the manliest of men. Tough, muscular, virile, and ready to die for a cause, whether that's protecting the people they love or their country. Later in the mid to late 2000s, the hypermasculine action genre and promotion of manly men came back due to the popularity of 80s nostalgia. Guys punching guys, shooting guys, stabbing guys, while lovingly admiring each other's biceps. I might be misremembering that last one. Oh wait, no, Top Gun. Now this might not seem important, but the resurgence of the hypermasculine male in media was a significant moment. A lot of young men grew up with these movies and TV shows, witnessing what they considered to be the pinnacle of man, and these perceptions gradually helped form the ideas around alpha and sigma males, but more on those later. Over these decades though, progress was gradually being made in furthering the visibility and rights of people outside of straight men. Women were entering the workplace, earning money, gaining more autonomy. LGBTQ people were becoming more visible and accepted in many parts of the world, and people of color were being given the rights and opportunities that they didn't have before. Of course, there is a tremendous amount of progress yet to be made in furthering the rights of these groups, but nonetheless, the fact that they were being given a more equitable share of the world became a terrifying prospect to a lot of straight men, especially white men. As those changes were occurring, more people became mindful and critical of the flaws inherent to hegemonic masculinity, and some men saw this as a challenge, believing that the part of the world that they've owned since the beginning of time was at risk of being taken away from them, that feminists and leftists were manipulating the media, academia, and even governments, and concocting a grand scheme to bring the end of the reign of men. Thus, a time marked by social progress for marginalized groups also became the perfect time for political and corporate interests to strike at the vulnerability of men and mobilize them against the supposed threat of change. There are many things in the world that have long been considered the domain of men, whether it's sports, cars, video games, business, or even something like anime. There's no mystery as to why this is though, as each of these things has been aggressively marketed towards men as things that they can enjoy or a place where they can belong. It's in more recent times when there has been a greater push to be more inclusive, notably within video games. In 2004, the Gamergate movement began, where gamers were outraged at what they considered a lack of ethics within games journalism, after it was believed that an indie game developer slept with a critic in exchange for a positive review of their game. This outrage served as a catalyst for gamers, specifically male ones, to call out the supposed injustices within the medium. But as the movement grew, it became more and more apparent that this wasn't about ethics or integrity. It was about women making their way into something that men believed to be theirs. Whenever topics were brought up about inclusivity of women or minorities within video games or the industry itself, proper representation, boosting voices from different cultures, or basically making anything that wasn't squarely aimed at men, people from the Gamergate movement immediately became defensive about this medium that they love, even for the most minuscule of reasons, claiming that it's censorship whenever a female character has their breast size reduced, or how Japanese titles had been altered upon their Western releases, such as the removal of vagina bones. Oh no, not the vagina bones, she needs those to live. This kind of response still continues to this day, and is not limited to just video games. When a woman or person of color is cast in a role that was originally played by a white man, there's an outcry. When a celebrity announces that they're trans or non-binary, there's an outcry. When there's a queer character in something, there's an outcry. When a character in a revival of a children's cartoon is no longer wearing a revealing outfit or has a smaller bust, there's a sad, pathetic outcry. It's all anger for the sake of being angry. Just recently, Netflix announced the casting for Neil Gaiman's Sandman adaptation, and these same people got upset because the role of Death was given to black actor Kirby Howell-Baptiste, and non-binary actor Mason Alexander Park was given the role of Desire, who Neil Gaiman has clearly stated is a non-binary character. Thankfully, he hit back at the complainers, saying that he gives zero fucks about the people who don't understand / haven't read Sandman, whining about a non-binary desire or that Death isn't white enough. Honestly, I'm amazed that these people weren't upset that Neil's last name is Gaiman. Oh yeah, and as I was writing this, it was confirmed that Loki in the MCU, true to canon, is gender fluid. It's funny how when characters in fiction are gender or race swapped, these people cry that it's not canon, but when writers stick to the canon in this way, it's political. Outrage is something that is rife within right-wing groups across the world, and fandoms of these various forms of media are clearly prone to bouts of anger when something has been made that doesn't conform enough to their perspective of the world. If there's a female lead character in a movie or video game, then they need to be attractive or sexually available. If it's a guy, then they can't be gay, and if the source material says it's a white person, well, it needs to remain a white person to them. This is all born from a fear of change and an inability to control things though. As I mentioned at the beginning of this chapter, so many industries and institutions have been created with the intention of catering to men, and if they're presented something like a video game or a movie where they're offered a perspective they're not familiar with, such as a woman's or queer persons, etc., instead of it being seen as a chance to experience something through someone else's eyes, is seen as an agenda being forced on them, that creators are saying that who they are is no longer important, that they need to step aside and accept that they're gradually being erased. Representation is incredibly important though. We need to learn about the stories of other people, learn about their struggles and adversity, so we can better understand how to fix them. The majority of right-wing men aren't interested in experiencing those stories of marginalized people though, because one, they believe that since they're facing adversity themselves, someone else's isn't as important or being embellished, and two, it means coming to terms with the fact that those groups have been marginalized historically because of men and white people, and it's hard to be accountable for something like that. Instead of allowing people to speak up about how they've been oppressed or discriminated against, they're told that it's their fault. Like when people claim that so many black people are poor because they haven't tried hard enough to climb out of poverty, or that women don't get equal pay because they aren't suited to do the jobs that deserve higher pay. In their minds, if someone faces adversity, then it's something that they brought upon themselves, but if men face it, then someone else is to blame. Now that I've said all that, it sounds like a good time to talk about women. If you're a woman, there's probably a high likelihood that you've gotten the attention of a man who is attracted to you, but you don't reciprocate the same feeling. Although being rejected feels awful, rejecting someone can also feel bad because you've disappointed another person just by being honest. A lot of people are more than capable of accepting this as the risk that you take when you put yourself out there and allow yourself to be vulnerable. It still hurts, but it's part of this ridiculous game of love that we all play. Obviously, this isn't just exclusive to men and women. People across all genders and sexual orientations know this feeling very well, whether you're the rejecting party or the rejected. But in this case, I want to look at the dynamics in romantic pursuits between men and women. Now, as I said, a lot of men are able to understand why when asking a woman out that they might not feel the same and handle rejection sensibly. They can move on with their lives, and in the case of confessing their feelings to a friend, they can continue their friendship, Sure, it could be a little bit awkward knowing that they're spending time with a person that wants a greater level of intimacy with them, but it's possible. You might even be shocked to learn that even I've been rejected. I know. Me. In the early age of internet memes, you may remember the Forever Alone meme, a drawing of a face desperately trying to maintain a smile while hiding the pain and solitude of rejection. There also came the term friend zone, referring to someone being rejected by someone and having to remain friends with them. That term carried some negative connotations with it though, that it's a place that you end up when you failed at something, that you said the wrong things and acted the wrong way or didn't look good enough. There's obviously a lot of immaturity in devaluing the prospect of being friends with someone, and as the manosphere and men's rights movement started to grow on the internet, being friend-zoned meant that not only are you a failure, but you're a victim. That the person who rejected you was callous enough to ignore everything nice that you've done for them, and doesn't find you desirable for all the things that you believe are desirable about you. It's also become a way for men to justify their anger when they're rejected by a woman because they believe that after investing so much time, effort, and even money in someone, they deserve something in return and are denied it. In a sense, that is a somewhat fair expectation. If you have a friend that you've spent a lot of time with, listening to their problems, trying to make them feel better, helping with certain tasks, etc., you would at the very least hope that they could offer some of those same things in return. A big part of friendship is putting in effort for someone you care for and reciprocating when you can. The problem with men's romantic pursuits of women is that some believe that going above and beyond what a friend would do automatically deems them better than other suitors. It's kind of like people who think that just by giving someone something nice or expensive gifts, it makes them entitled to sex or a relationship. Entitlement is an important word in this situation because male entitlement has been taught to men throughout their entire life. They're told that if they work hard, be a gentleman, be strong, and be good to women, then good things will automatically come their way. It also doesn't help that there's an endless amount of movies and TV shows that represent male entitlement, especially towards women, in the worst ways. Those movie action stars got the girl because they did something heroic. Rich men got gorgeous women because wealth is attractive, and the nerdy guy got the girl because he was persistent. The problem with these representations of romance though, is that they almost always completely ignore the genuine emotional connections that are formed throughout the early ages of getting to know someone, and turn seduction into some sort of game where you simply need to fulfill certain requirements to win a partner. Kind of like anime visual novels where you can literally look up a guide online to reach your desired outcome. If you want to learn more about this, I highly recommend Pop Culture Detective's videos Stalking for Love and the Complicity of Geek Masculinity. In fact, all of his videos are excellent, so go check him out, link in the description. This simplistic view of attraction and seduction has also led to the creation of the pickup artist community, where men share tips and tricks on how to talk to women, the kind of body language you should use, different types of women and the tactics that they respond to, how you should dress, how to hide your less appealing features. It's seemingly endless. This isn't a new thing though. Albert Ellis wrote the book The Art of Erotic Seduction back in 1967, and in the 1980s, Ross Jeffries hosted workshops on seduction. There was even a reality show on VH1 called The Pickup Artist in 2007, which was hosted by Eric von Markovic, or as he likes to call himself, Mystery. It was a reality show where he would teach men how to pick up women in nightclubs using his method of the game, and it's aged about as well as expired milk in a hot car. I mean, look at this guy, look at this hat, seriously, like, who's banging that? Someone tell me. I would like to say it's a product of its time, but it wasn't okay then, and it's definitely not okay now. Although pickup artists like Mr. Mystery were awful in their treatment of women by seducing them and reducing them to a game where you just had to push the right buttons, the modern pickup artist movement has evolved into something profoundly disgusting, where women are reduced further in their worth, and misogyny is core to their ideology. These newer pickup artists teach that emotional attachment should be avoided at all costs, that a man's desire for a woman shouldn't be for companionship or emotional connection, but to simply fulfill your desire for sex. That women aren't complex beings such as yourself, that you need to revert to being a caveman, see sex as a utilitarian thing. It of course treats the amount of women that they've slept with as a sign of status, since virility is another important aspect of masculinity that many men believe should be celebrated, which is ironically contrary to the belief that women have little value to them. It is a sickening system with sickening people in it, and all it does is exploit lonely men who refuse to engage with women as individuals with their own desires. Instead, they're seeing them as an equation to be solved, a conquest to be had. Unsurprisingly, all these pickup artists are frauds. They don't hold the secret to women because there is no secret. These people are all snake oil salesmen, selling lonely and alienated men a solution, then blaming them when they don't succeed. The very nature of pickup artists places the burden of loneliness solely on women. It convinces men that if they follow all the steps correctly, then there is something wrong with the person that they use their techniques with, and they're not playing by the rules as they're supposed to. Experiences such as being rejected, despite doing what they believe is the right thing, and refusing to accept that there isn't a set process to attracting a partner, can lead them to feeling angry and bitter with women. This frustration with failure and refusal to change leads some men down a very dark path, where they end up finding refuge with others who have shared their experiences and happy to tell them that what they're doing is absolutely fine. It's women that are the problem, not you. Some will go on to claim that the standards of handsomeness for men is far too high as well, that women are unable to look past the average looking faces and bodies of men to see the goodness that's underneath. To counteract this, male communities have come up with something called lux maxing, where advice is given on how to conceal or distract from features that are considered less desirable. It can include clothing that can make you look taller, even drastic solutions like dangerous surgical procedures that you can do yourself, like altering your nose bridge with a hammer. It's basically an extreme and horrific version of makeup tutorials. We all want to look nice for ourselves and others, and people aren't to blame for not being born with the ideal body or face type. Luckily, we have personalities, and to many people, a good personality is far more valuable than looks. And I'm sure that some of you just rolled your eyes saying that it's bullshit, but it is true. I speak from experience. Unfortunately, it can lead to many people within these communities becoming angry at the fact that they were genetically cursed from the moment that they were conceived, that the wrong skull shape doomed them to a life of loneliness, and if they only had a few more inches of bone mass on their jaw, or even a few less, it would have resulted in a completely different life. To some extent, there is some truth to this. Beautiful people are generally treated better by the world, but believing your height or head shape has ruined any chance of romance is completely false. And it's just another way in which people can justify not working on who they are as a person or blaming societal standards. There's also an ironic tendency among more average-looking men to want a conventionally beautiful partner that loves them despite how they look, but at the same time dating an average-looking woman is simply out of the question. Having a beautiful partner is seen as a sign of status in society, one that's unfortunately been perpetuated far too much by the media and other men, and so they seek to be validated among their peers. There are plenty of wonderful, available, average-looking people out there, but it's not enough to them. They need someone to show off and say, "I'm so great that I was able to land a woman like this." When you refuse to work on your personality though, and treat women like trophies, I don't know how you'd attract anyone like that. Instead, it ends up being rationalized that the world is the real problem, and that in turn drags them into the world of incels, men going their own way, or MGTOW, and the red pill, All groups who see themselves as victims of the world, who celebrate masculinity, devalue women, look down on LGBTQ people and all minorities, all fueled by the belief that those outside of the manosphere are conspiring against them, removing men of their power that they believe they earned by virtue of being a man, and ultimately convincing themselves that as other people gain more rights and autonomy, men are being stripped of theirs. As more men have become disenfranchised by the changes occurring in the modern world, they've begun to seek solace from people like them who find it hard to comprehend what's actually happening. Instead of accepting that in order for others to gain power, then power must be distributed from those who have it, men on the right considered this as a seizure of power that they didn't agree to, and it rightfully belongs to them. In essence, men have been running the world since day one, and it's only right that the world be shared equally among everyone, regardless of gender, colour, or sexuality. When men believe that the lion's share of power should naturally belong to them, it's not surprising that they want to seek allies whose beliefs align with theirs, so they seek communities where they can share and experience those sentiments. Various message boards have become the home for young men who are disenfranchised with the changing times, namely 4chan, 8kun, and various subreddits, which I will not name here because I don't want to platform them in any way. These boards have become a place where they can share their stories, give advice, express their grievances, and be around like-minded people, which on the surface sounds good, since it's nice to have a place where you feel like you belong, but the discussions that people have in these places can be truly vile, and it's often met with little to no resistance. An interesting observation can be made with these communities though. In a joint study conducted by the University of Melbourne and the Monash University, they were looking at the online communication habits of people that consider themselves MGTOW, or men going their own way. They found that the majority of discourse on various message boards gravitated towards openly misogynistic discussions about women and men attempting to rationalize the MGTOW ideology. Much of the discourse taking place was people agreeing with each other, strengthening their belief systems, and developing upon it with other ideas, which would sometimes lead to grander theories beyond women, such as anti-Semitic conspiracies. Despite all having similar grievances, the men on these boards actually had a very strong sense of community and camaraderie. Oh, and I'm sure that some of you have noticed the title in that corner right here. Let me reassure you that yes, that is an actual title from a legitimate study from 2 actual universities. In fact, here's the paper just to prove it to you. Here, put it on screen. Yeah, see? The irony of belonging to this community though is that MGTOW is an ideology based around individualism. They're people who claim to be shunning the demands of this new world and doing their own thing, even if that means foregoing any relationships. They tell themselves that they have no need for anyone other than themselves, yet at the same time they're online and part of a community which supports each other. They do need and want to talk to other people, even though it's paradoxical to their beliefs, but it's a community that enables its members to develop their already hateful outlook into something worse, validating their anger towards women and the world at large. When you're talking to other people who have had similar experiences to you, in this case having difficulty with women, and you turn to them for answers as to why this is happening, you'll find people who offer solutions that make sense but might not be the truth. That feminism is causing women to hate men, that women are being turned gay by propaganda, as are men, which devalues masculinity, all sorts of rationalizations which turn the blame away from you. When those theories take root though, it primes people for even bigger ones to explain why those things are happening, ones that can validate a right-wing man's hatred of people not just because of their gender or sexuality, but by race. Many of you are already very aware that there are an absurd amount of anti-Semitic conspiracies in the world, whether it's about global finance, controlling governments, COVID vaccinations, flat earth, etc. Almost every conspiracy out there leads towards the conclusion that there are powerful Jewish people running the world. And it goes back as far as 1903 with the publication of Protocols of the Elders of Zion. Figures within the right will often scapegoat Jewish people for seemingly anything, especially progressive issues, but by doing so it makes it much easier to push people towards fascism, since at this point they're persecuting people because of their race. During the making of this video, I spoke to someone who told me of his experiences with the far right. He asked to remain anonymous but said I could refer to him as Sam. Now, to be clear, this is anecdotal. There are so many ways in which people can become radicalized into being right-wing or extremist thinking, but Sam's story is one that is very recognizable now and illustrates how easy it is to fall down the rabbit hole for sad and angry men. Sam told me that when he joined the far right, he was disenfranchised, unsuccessful with women, and suffered from anxiety and depression. He also told me he was considered gifted, but was a chronic underachiever in his teenage years. This was also around the time where he discovered 4chan, and after spending enough time on there, seeing the normalization of various slurs towards minorities and exposure to radical right-wing thought, his perspective on the world began to change. As time progressed, Sam became indoctrinated with the hateful language and ideologies of 4chan users, especially when the poll board came into existence, and it very quickly became home to some of the most right-wing extremist thinking that you could imagine. As a disenfranchised, depressed, underachieving, and romantically unsuccessful young man, Sam's mind was ripe for radicalization, and it could happen without him even noticing. It did happen. He believed that any kind of societal progression that happened was done so to weaken men, and inevitably brought him towards Jewish conspiracies. Sam was also battling with depression at the time. He sought professional advice for it, and received medication which he tried off and on, but stopped, believing that it wasn't working, that seeking help was a weakness, and going so far as to believe that antidepressants were the creation of a Jewish conspiracy to keep him down. He also struggled with his sexuality, but perceived it as a character flaw that he needed to address, and that anything other than heterosexuality was a threat to the traditional family unit. He had a home with these strangers online, but kept feeling more and more estranged to the people who were actually close to him, that had been by his side long before the anonymous users on 4chan did. Sam's need to fuel his anger and hatred started to clash with his real life, and ironically ended up feeling alone. Thankfully, things are different for Sam now. The more time he spent on the boards, the more common it became to see conspiracies that Sam knew were simply implausible. This included Holocaust denial, and although Sam was a revisionist, he couldn't accept that it didn't happen at all. And seeing all the other users go along with these conspiracies, unquestioning the validity of their claim, he began to realize that the people on it weren't interested in the truth. They were interested in lies that gave them comfort to believe. When he entered higher education, he was with other students of different races and backgrounds, and although he initially tried to maintain distance from them, he found that in the circumstances that he was in, it was impossible to do so. By connecting with them and seeing them as other human beings he could be friends with, Sam's right-wing ideology just started to fall apart. Sam told me that to hate with such intensity is mentally and emotionally exhausting, and now that I'm free of it, I am happier in my day-to-day life, and my relationships with other people are far more healthier. Sam, I know that we've never met and we probably never will, but I want to say that I am extremely proud of you, and I'm sure a lot of people who just heard your story will be too. De-radicalizing takes an extraordinary amount of effort, and I'm glad that you weren't so far gone that you were able to lift yourself out of that hole. Thank you for sharing your experience with me and everyone else, Sam. You and everyone like you should be commended. The disturbing thing about this pipeline into right-wing ideology is that at this point we all recognize it. In fact, what I just said before Sam's story is basically the same trajectory. Young men who are disenfranchised, sad, alone, who refuse to reach out for help because they think it's something that men just shouldn't do, so they seek anonymous solutions online instead. They turn to people who offer simplified solutions to the way that they feel, and none of them involve taking accountability or changing. It's always someone else's fault. Can't get a date? Feminism. Can't get a job? Immigrants are stealing them. Lacking wealth? Jewish conspiracy. It's all hatred towards the other. It fuels men's anger. It isolates them and makes them miserable. But instead of looking further into why they might feel this way, there are men online to tell them that they just need to stay angry, that their hatred is warranted, and if being alone and unhappy is a byproduct of knowing the truth, then you should wear it as a badge of honor, because it's better to go your own way than turn against your fellow men. It's not just the message boards either. Right here on YouTube, there are dozens of extremely popular right-wing channels that pander to men and their outrage. Figures like Ben Shapiro, Steven Crowder, Dave Rubin, and Dennis Prager have tens of millions of subscribers. I mean, just look at this thumbnail. Like, did Dennis know that I was going to make this video? It's not just media figures too. Like I mentioned earlier, there are men within nerd cultures that get incensed when something like a movie or a video game tries to do something that's even remotely progressive. People like Tim Pool and The Quartering have a massive audience, and they're able to pump out multiple 10-minute videos a day, barely edited at all, and complaining about an article that they saw, feeding their outrage about it to their viewers, and it works wonders, to be honest with you. You will never go poor pandering to outrage, even if it's completely manufactured, and these people know it very, very well. In a weird way, it kind of makes me envious. I wish that I could crap out 3 videos a day with just me and a webcam in the corner whining about how SJWs are taking away the boobs, but unfortunately I have integrity. Anger is a perfectly valid emotion that we're all entitled to. All sorts of things can cause you to be angry, but one of the hardest forms of anger to reckon with is that caused by feeling that you're in an unjust world. The reasons you feel that way might be inexplicable, that you know something is wrong but you just can't explain it. In situations like those, it's tempting to turn towards answers that exempt you or people like you from any responsibility. No one likes having to take blame, accepting that they're complicit or that they need to change, but it has to be done. As I said near the beginning of this, the right-wing mindset is driven by rage against the other. It believes that tradition is the key to restoring countries to greatness and that we should fight against progress in order to maintain that. Part of the reason so many older generations veer towards conservative values is because they grew up in countries like America during prosperous eras and believed that the way people were then were instrumental in economic and cultural prosperity. But that simply wasn't true. Wages were much higher back then. A dollar was worth far more than it is now. The richest people were taxed as high as 91% of their wealth. Wealth in general was spread around more evenly. It had nothing to do with tradition, it was all policy. It was also a time where bigotry was rampant. Human beings were openly discriminated against because of the color of their skin and denied the same rights as everyone else. Women were treated like second-class citizens, and if you were queer, trans, or anything other than straight, you were forced to stay in the closet. Bringing back the traditions of this era won't fix things. It will just keep people down, and if you think that's a worthy sacrifice because it will benefit you, then you are dead wrong. The people and politicians who espouse that immigrants are taking your job, that women are taking over the country, and LGBTQ people are deviants destroying families, don't want to return to a prosperous time, because they're the same people taking money from the wealthiest people in the world to prevent policies being passed that will mean that they have to create more and better paying jobs. They're demanding that instead of looking at the upper echelons of society to see the real reason why you're broke, miserable, and alone, you look down instead and blame marginalized people for wanting to take what little you already have and not consider for a moment why they want better. And no, there isn't some Jewish cabal that secretly controls the entire hierarchy of people. It's the wealthy and politicians who decide what happens to everyone below them. The funny thing is really you do have a reason to be angry. I'm angry at this whole situation. Frankly, if you're not angry, then you're not paying attention. But it can also be incredibly destructive when directed at others who don't deserve it, and of course, yourself. Anger leads to hate, and when you're being told that you should hate other people because they're different to you, it accomplishes nothing, especially when you consider that they may be going through some similar or even worse struggles than you. We need to work together to elevate each other. There's an odd comfort in feeding anger, to know there are other people out there who are just as angry as you and want some explanation as to why. But the explanations within right-wing spheres never involve being accountable for your own actions. And when you believe that you are doing everything right but nothing changes, you end up feeling more angry, alone, alienated, and confused. If abiding by tradition isn't working out for you, then it's simple. Move away from it. I spoke quite a bit about masculinity at the start of this video, and there's a reason behind that. Masculinity has become the product of the right, but it's an identity which doesn't suit all men. There's nothing particularly wrong with being a manly man. If that's your thing and you're comfortable with it, then that's great, honestly, really great. But it's wrong to expect that every other man abides by your identity, and worse to believe that they are less than you. There is no set definition of what a man should be. Take me for example. I can grow a beard in 5 minutes. I know how to work with my hands, fix things, make things. I enjoy a good steak, and I like John Wick movies just as much as the next man. I also love baking. I would choose a fruity drink over a beer any day of the week. I don't like sports. I speak openly about my emotions, talk to people about theirs. I have a 3-step skincare routine. I'm wearing foundation and concealer right now, and I'm not ashamed about crying. I'm also happily married to my wonderful wife and do the majority of the homemaking. Does that make me any less of a man? No, because men are layered creatures. We're all different, and there's no use in pretending that we shouldn't like certain things or feel certain ways. I also want to add that I hate how the variety in men's clothing is so limited. Why is there a stigma about men wearing skirts? It gets hot during the summer, yet we're expected to stuff our junk into a pair of pants. Normalize skirts for men, please. There is no such thing as an alpha male, a sigma male, a beta male, whatever. There's just men. There's just people. When some men hear the term toxic masculinity, they immediately groan and think it's just another way in which women and everyone else want to blame men for everything. Toxic masculinity does harm other people in many different ways, but it also harms yourself by keeping you in a prison, making sure you don't break the rules, even though it could end up benefiting you or the people in your life. That thing I just said about men not being allowed to wear skirts, that is an example of toxic masculinity. You're told that you shouldn't wear something that could make you more comfortable, and that it's better to endure the discomfort of male-coded clothing just so you can show the world that you're a man. You're putting your comfort aside just to show the rest of the world who you are. Like, that doesn't seem fair, does it? Like, look at this crap. No airbags, we die like real men. Is that really a justification for avoiding very basic safety measures? Are people going to be at their funeral thinking, well, at least he died doing what he loved the most, being a man? I'm sure his 3 children will understand. I know this is just a bumper sticker and it's stupid, but it's emblematic of how far some men will go to prove how much of a man they are and end up accepting self-destruction as part of that. Masculinity, tradition, refusing to change and empathize with others are core to the reasons why so many right-wing men are miserable, angry, alone, and indeed afraid. They've been fed lies their entire lives about how maintaining these values will ultimately make them a man worthy of celebration, but as time has progressed, we've begun to see the many flaws in this, and it's time we teach men these flaws. Thankfully, many younger generations are learning that there is no rigid definition to what a man is, but it's also younger people who are being dragged into right-wing spheres on message boards and YouTube so they can receive an explanation for their confusion, to understand why the world doesn't feel right, and learn that if men try hard enough, they can take it all back and have the satisfaction that they're entitled to. It's all wrong though. It's just pandering to your anger. Online communities are just an Ouroboros, endlessly chasing and swallowing its own tail, refusing to break the cycle. If you're a part of this cycle, you need to escape it. Stop seeking answers from people who just want to pander to your misery, because the more time that you spend filling yourself with anger and hatred, the less room you leave yourself for happiness and love. And it's always worth leaving room for that. Thank you very much for watching. If you did enjoy this video, then please don't forget to like, subscribe, all that kind of stuff. It really does help out. The channel's been doing really well recently, and it looks like I might hit 100k by the end of the year, which is a goal that I set myself, and yeah, that's amazing to see. So thank you all to the new subscribers, and yeah, thank you. Otherwise, I would like to give a thank you to all of my wonderful patrons that you can see scrolling here right now. And I would like to give a special shout out to all of my patrons that donated $5 or more each month. That goes to Rebecca Adams, Games, Martina, Sander Panda, Ashton the Platypus, CB Hart, Kevin Korber, Logan Rohn, Sharfay, Nostracon, Lexi Weiss, Fraser, Mariam, Mia Huxley, Floof Pants, Tamara, My Name is Pronounced Like Neve, Marius Stubberud, Your Sweet Pea, Catherine, and Steve Marr. Thank you all so much. It really does mean a lot to me, and if you want to join these wonderful people, you can do so at patreon.com/Salari. Any amount goes a very long way. You'll see a link at the end of the video, and it'll be in the description as well. Also, I would like to give a huge thanks to Dylan Reed Miller. She's been very helpful throughout the creation of this video. She was basically the script supervisor, looked over all of my mistakes and such, and helped me get some research papers as well, which I otherwise wouldn't have access to. So thank you. You've been invaluable. Tell her in the comments that she's done a great job. Thank you, Dylan. But otherwise, follow me on Twitter at SalariTV. I'm a very fun person. I have an amazing personality, and I'm very humble as well. Plus, I just need validation. Please give me validation via followers and likes. I love it. But otherwise, thank you very much for watching. Take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and I will see you next time. Bye-bye.